So the far side of the moon doesn't get the attention it deserves because we can't see it from Earth. But it's an important next phase in space exploration. China launched a probe a week ago to explore more of the lunar surface. But the question is, will this trigger a new arms race in outer space? Retired U.S. Navy Captain Winston Scott is a former astronaut and director of operational excellence at Kennedy Space Center. He's joined by Michael Pillsbury, a senior fellow for China strategy at the Heritage Foundation. It is so good to have you both. And, you know, we can't see the other side of the moon from here on Earth, which adds kind of to the mystique, Captain. But what makes the far side of the moon different, and why so much interest to get there?
Hey, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes this afternoon to spend time with you and your audience. The thing that makes the far side of the Earth so interesting is that it is different, and it is different because of how the moon was formed. We believe the moon was formed after a large planetary-sized body impacted the Earth some 4.5 billion years ago, slung this big piece of debris out into space. As it coalesced, the dark side, the far side, cooled at a different rate than the near side. So you got one rotating body that had essentially two different sides to it because one side cooled at a different rate than the other side. So on the near side of the moon is essentially hotter, or was hotter during its formation, therefore more volcanic activity. Cooler side, less volcanic activity, therefore we've got two different sides. So we don't know a lot about the dark side, as you already said, because we haven't been there yet, and there's very, very little data collected about that far side. So I hope I didn't get too much stuff in there, but that's essentially why it's different. And because they're different, we want to begin to learn about the far side. The Chinese probe this time is supposed to land on the dark side, but near the south pole of the moon, where we believe there's a lot of water ice there. And where there's water ice, that's a right place for humans to land and to live and to research and to do whatever else humans decide to do there. Let me stop here and let you guys jump back into the conversation.
No, very important stuff. I was going to actually, and I will ask you about the South Pole in a moment. NASA says that this is a new space race. So, Michael, like, what are the long-term plans China has for the moon? And I guess the concern is, are they using civilian programs to kind of hide military operations in space?
Well, that's what the head of NASA said this week, that China is using civilian science as a cover for a military program. So I agree with that. There's all kinds of evidence that he's right. There's another problem with what the goals are of a 20 or 30-year program. The Chinese are talking about 2040, 2050, what their technology base can do. They also talk about this particular mission this week. This is a round trip, and they're going to bring back rocks, apparently to examine the issue of what kind of resource might be there. There's the issue of ice. There's other things that could be there. But in the Chinese press, and with their younger generation, they are just obsessed with space. For us, it's like Alan Shepard and John Glenn. This is like 2 generations ago. We've already been there. But in the Chinese media, they talk a lot about how making territorial claims to resources is part of our goal. The Chinese will not sign any agreement. They will not join the Artemis Accord, for example. They won't sign any agreement that says they forswear seizing territory. Now, when we had astronauts put up the American flag, they were doing that as a symbolic gesture. They weren't claiming the moon for the United States. But the Chinese talk this way, that somehow they're going to dominate in space technology. They're going to exploit resources that they can find. And they and the Russians together want to set up a joint, they've announced this, they want to set up a joint base on the moon as part of the effort to go on to Mars as well. So we're facing a very different kind of rhetoric, a different kind of language from the Chinese side than we have from the American side, where this is really all about science and peace and getting along.
So, yeah,
the head of NASA probably is very far. The head of NASA may be in trouble with President Biden for talking this way. I happen to agree with him, though.
So quickly, Michael, and I'm gonna ask you, Captain, another question. But Michael, quickly, what if China does plant a flag and it's more not rhetorical, and they're like, "This is ours"? What happens? Are we going to have Star Wars battles for 50 years from now?
Yes, and they have a very active program that our Pentagon every now and then raises the curtain and shows something new. They've got a grappling hook that can reach out from one satellite to kidnap another. The Chinese say, oh, that's just to get space debris out. They've got maneuvering vehicles. They're doing things in space that we used to call counter space activities or offensive space activities. It's in the mandate of Space Force, but Space Force is complaining in public that they're not really getting the resources they need to go ahead and counter space. So this is another area where the Chinese are saying, once we get to the high ground, we can block the Americans from coming up. Now, maybe this is just Chinese military hawks saying this, but it's in their press and it's affecting their young generation, that we need to block the Americans from space.
So, Captain, you mentioned before about China and Russia partnering, right, to go to the South Pole in 6 years, with an outpost potentially there and water supplies potentially. Do you think that human life could be sustained somehow on the moon in the future?
I think if human life is going to be sustained on the future, we need to go where those resources are. As you know, water is not only essential to life for human beings. You know, we drink water, we bathe with water, we grow food with water. If we're going to build habitats on the moon, we might need to use water for that. But if water is present in this location, then the oxygen and the hydrogen can be used as a power source. So definitely, if we're going to go to the moon, we're going to live there, we need to go where the water is. Absolutely. If I can go back just a little bit, I'll tell you what, I think Michael made some great points there. I'd like to add to that, though, if you look at the history of China and the way China operates on Earth, that is, they're very aggressive, they're very secretive, they're very militaristic. What's to say they're not going to be that way on the moon? So in this case, I think past performance is an indicator of what future performance might be.
You know, Jackie Gleason may have been ahead of his time. To the moon, Alice! Well, we might all be there one day. Michael Pillsbury and Captain Winston Scott, so appreciative. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you very much.